In this video, we're going to start working with dates and time in JavaScript. This is going to allow us to wire up the last feature for the Notes application, which is not wired up. That is our sorting dropdown. We can sort by last edited, when the actual note was created, or we could sort alphabetically. Now, we could probably figure out how to sort alphabetically right now using what we already know, but it's these two that are going to require us to worry about date and time. So before we try to integrate anything into the Notes application, I just want to mess around with the date in JavaScript in one of our files outside of any sort of function. We're just going to run a bit of code. That code is going to print some stuff to the console, and we'll be able to explore how we can work with dates. To kick things off, let's make a new date that represents the current point in time when the line of code actually runs. We're going to create a const called now, and I'm going to set it equal to, and then we're going to type out the following. It's going to be new, space, date, and then we'll open and close a set of parentheses. Now, if we were to remove the new and the extra space, we would get code like this, which we could understand. We have a date function, we call it with no arguments, and then we store its return value on the now variable. By introducing the new operator into the mix, all we're doing is we're creating a new instance of date that represents the current point in time. We'll explore new in a lot more detail in a few sections. For now, though, we're just going to be using it before date to create a new date. From here, we could now do something with the current date. We could, for example, manipulate it. I could figure out what day of the month it is. We can just print out all of the information, though, using the toString method. Console.log now.toString. This is going to give us a string representation of our date, and that's going to allow us to just view some generic output. If I switch over to the terminal, what do we get? We get Monday, February 6th, 2018. The time is indeed 7:44 in the morning, and then right here I have my time zone related information. So by using toString, we were able to get a pretty big string that represents exactly what we have here. Now, when it comes to printing things about our dates, we're not exactly going to be printing all of this information. We want to print some sort of message like maybe the day of the month with the month in shorthand, but I don't want all of this other stuff. Or maybe I even want to print a variation on the date saying something like 6 hours ago instead of talking about the date or time at all. I just want to know how long in the past a note was edited, for example. So the date object does give us everything we need to get all of that done. We can extract individual pieces of information, and we can also go ahead and manipulate that information. So that's where I want to turn next. But before I do, let's pull up the documentation for date because there are a lot of methods we can work with. Right here, that is MDN date. On that page, we're going to have just a ton of methods on the left-hand sidebar. We have all sorts of methods like getDate, getDay, we have getMonth. If we keep scrolling down, we have maybe 30 or 40 different methods. Various methods for getting information and various methods for setting information. Let's go ahead and explore a couple of the basic ones, allowing us to extract some information related to the current point in time. Right here, I'm going to use console.log a few times to print out those various pieces related to the date. So console.log, and we're going to set up a little template. So it'll be a template string. I'll say year for the year, colon space, then we're going to interpolate some value. Now, what we're going to do for getting the year is to use a method on now. So that's now dot, and this one is get full year. When we call get full year, we're going to get the year information back. In this case, I'm running this JavaScript file in 2018, so I would expect to see 2018 over in the console, and that is exactly what I have right here. Year 2018, same as what we saw up above. I'm going to temporarily move the developer tools to the bottom so we can see the console output without needing to switch between the windows. Now let's go ahead and take this line and copy it down below, and we're going to talk about how we can get the month. Right here, month. And to get the month, we're going to be using another method on now, that is now.getMonth. GetMonth is going to return the number that represents the current month, and this one is actually 0 indexed. So it's currently February, and I'm getting 1. That is correct. It's not a mistake. January is represented by 0, and we go all the way up to December, which is represented by 11. Now, this is a pretty annoying aspect of working with date, the built-in JavaScript date. So we'll actually talk about other ways we can manage our dates in a little bit. But for now, let's go ahead and continue on. We are going to paste in another one of those console.log lines. Next up, we have the day of the month. Right here, that's going to be just a different method call, and you'll notice that all of these involved with extracting information do not require us to pass in any arguments. This one is getDate. GetDate is going to return the day of the month, and if I go ahead and run things, we get 26, matching up with February 26th. All right, now we can keep continuing on. Next up, we're going to talk about some more specific things to the time. So we have the big picture date stuff out of the way, but how do I, for example, get the hours, minutes, and seconds? Right here, let's go ahead and paste one more console.log and knock this out. We'll start off with hours, hour, then we'll set up our new method call. This one is called getHours appropriately. And then we can just paste in the other two before we even save things and see them print. After hour, we're going to set up minute. To get the minute, we use another method, getMinutes. Right here, getMinutes. And as you can probably guess, we're going to use getSeconds to get the seconds. Right here, seconds, space. Now, if I go ahead and save things, we have our 6 console.logs statements printing, and they're all extracting the information from that date. So this is perfect. It's going to allow us to pull out the individual pieces and then use them to serve our purposes. So I might not want to always show the year, the month, or the day, or sometimes I might not want to show anything related to the time, and I only want to show the date, for example. So all of this is possible with date in JavaScript. We create a new date, we then use those methods to pull out information. What I want to take a quick moment to talk about is how we can create a date at a different point in time, not just the current one. For example, if I have a note edited 6 months ago, I want to get a date representation of that time so I can use these methods to print something to the screen. Well, we can actually create a date at a specific point in time by providing something right here in this function call. If we provide no arguments, it gets created to the current point in time. If we provide some arguments, we can really specify when this now variable represents. The first thing we can put in here is a string representation of the point in time we're trying to work with. So I could say something like January, I could say 21st, and then let's use the year 2001. And then we could specify the time as well. So I could say at 6 in the morning, let's do 6 hours, 25 minutes, and 1 second. Now, if we were to save things, now no longer represents the time in which this script runs. When we provide an argument, we are using this information instead, and we can see that when we use toString, we get the information outlined as we just specified, and down below, all of the individual pieces are printing correctly too. Notice that we have 0 for month. Remember, that is 0 indexed. Now, passing in a string to date actually isn't very common. When we're passing around date-related information in our code, we typically store it as a number. This might look a little weird at first, but it actually makes a whole lot of sense, and it's going to make saving and storing information easy. If I want to store a created at value and a last edited at value on each note, all I really need to do is add 2 new properties whose values are numbers. Now, an important and missing piece to this puzzle is going to be what's known as the Unix epoch. The Unix epoch is a specific point in time that is in the past. This point in time is January 1st of the year 1970 at midnight. So 0 for the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. This is the Unix epoch. When we represent time as a number, we use positive numbers for all points in time after this, and negative numbers for all points in time before. So I would use a positive number for today, 2018. I would use a negative number to represent 1930. Now, the number itself is just a number. So 0 represents this point in time exactly. As the number increases, we increase the number of milliseconds. So if I wanted to move 1 second in the future from this point in time, I would represent it via 1,000, since there are 1,000 milliseconds in a second. If I wanted to move 1 minute in the past, it would be a negative number, and it would be 60 seconds for a minute times 1,000, so that would be 60,000. So this timestamp, this point in time, would be just a minute before the Unix epoch. Now you can imagine that if we're representing things in milliseconds, the current day in 2018 today is going to be a huge number, and you would be right. So let's explore exactly how we can get this number and work with it. I'm going to remove that line right there, and then I'm going to comment out all of the other lines we created down below, and we're just going to stick with a single one, a single console.log. And here, we're still going to be using now, our date, but we're going to work with a different method called getTime. GetTime is what returns that timestamp. It returns a number that represents exactly whatever now is. In this case, now is after 1970, so I would expect it to be a positive number. If I save things and rerun it, you can see we get just that. Here we have a huge number. We have 100,000s, we have millions. It looks like this one's about 980 billion milliseconds. So obviously just a really big number representing the number of seconds between 1970 and 2001. Now, if we were to remove this argument altogether and get a date that represents today, we would get an even bigger number. Here we can see we've moved up. We were at 98 before, now we're at 151. So all the time is always going to increase as we go forward and decrease as we go into the past. This is going to be a very easy way to represent a specific point in time. Now, if we have this timestamp, let's say that we store it in a variable, we can always get a date representation of it back. So let's explore what I mean by that. Right here, we're going to remove this console.log line, and I'm just going to use const timestamp equals now.getTime. So let's just say that we get this off of our note. Maybe it's stored in local storage. It's just a number. Now let's say we want to get something like the year of that timestamp. The first thing we have to do is convert it back to a date. Const my date equals, we make a new date like we did before. This time though, we don't pass in nothing and we don't pass in a string. We actually just pass in the number. So I can pass in timestamp, and date is going to correctly use that to set my date. Now we can get the year using what we already learned about. Console.log my date dot, and then right here, get full year. I run it, I save it, I print it, and I get 2018. So this is the sort of code we're going to be using when we create a new note. It allows us to get the timestamp and save it. This is the sort of code we're going to be using after we read the data from local storage and we want to do something specific related to the date. Now, when we have timestamps, it's really easy to figure out if one thing came before or after another. I can simply use the less than or greater than operator on my numbers to get that done. Now it's challenge time. Down below, I'm going to outline what I'd like you to do. Down here, I'll add some comments in, and there are 3 steps. The big picture goal is to create 2 dates at some point in time. They don't have to be in the past. You can pass in the string to create that date. So you'll pass in a string right here, like we did when we created the date in 2001. Once you have both of the dates, you're going to get the time stamps for both. So you want to get the numerical representation of that date, and then you're going to figure out which one comes first using the comparison operators we already know about, and you're going to print the one which does come first. You can print it using toString, which we explored in the beginning of the video, that printed a generic string with all of the information about a date. So take some time to knock all of this out. You're going to create those dates, you're going to get those timestamps, you're going to figure out which comes first, then you're going to log the one which does come first. Pause the video, take some time to knock this out. When you're done, come back and click play. All right, how'd you do? Let's go ahead and knock this out. Step 1, to create those 2 dates in the past. So const date1 equals new date. And I'm going to pass a string in right here. Let's go ahead and represent sometime next month. So I could say something like March 1, which is later this week, 2018. And then we'll set up our hours, minutes, and seconds. I'll just use noon. So 12, 0 for the minutes, and 0 for the seconds. Now we can create another date representing a different point in time, const date2. This will be a new date, and we can actually leave this one as today if we wanted to, as long as the two dates are indeed different. The next thing we need to do is get the timestamps, the numeric representation for the date, and it'll be very easy to figure out which comes before another. Right here, const date 1 timestamp equals, and we just use date1.getTime, and we do the exact same thing for the second one, const date2 timestamp equals date2.getTime. Now we have two numbers. We already know how to figure out if one number comes before or after another. I'll set up an if statement to get this done. If, and here we'll see if date1 comes first. So date1 is less than, date1 timestamp is less than date2 timestamp. If it is less than, we know that date1 comes first and we can print it. Console.log using date1.toString to just get hold of the information about it. Now we can add an else if to our if statement to check if it's the other one that comes first. Right here inside of the condition, we'll be checking if date2 timestamp is less than date1 timestamp. If it is less than, then it comes first and we'll print it. Console.log date2.toString. Now, if we wanted to, we could also add on an else clause. That would be when they are not before or after one another, but they're exactly the same. I'm not going to add that in here, but you could add it on to handle that edge case. Right here, we can see that February 6th, which is today, does indeed come before March 1st of 2018. If I were to switch up this date to March 1st of 2017, we would see that that is the date that comes first. The other one showing up as coming second, so it's not printed at all. And there we have it. We now know a little bit about working with dates in JavaScript. Now, as we can see, working with this date object is going to be a pretty big burden. The methods available to us do not give us meaningful ways to print our dates and work with them. If I wanted to print out the month February using the date object, there is no method to get that done. I would have to take our months, I would have to figure out what the number is, and I would have to keep track of some sort of list of all of these strings, and then I would look them up by their index. That's going to be a huge burden, and it's going to require us to write just a ton of code to get the simplest stuff printed. It's nice that JavaScript has a built-in date that we can work with, but when it comes to actually integrating time and date into our application, we typically use a library, a third-party library that makes life a whole lot easier. The third-party library that we're going to be talking about is called Moment, and we'll be discussing this in the very next video. We're essentially going to cover some of what we just covered, but using this library, and you'll see how it's going to make our code a lot cleaner and a lot easier to work with. I've used Moment in every single client project I've ever done, so let's go ahead and jump right into the next video and see what exactly it can do. I'll see you then.